Members, we now come to the New Zealand Superannuation and Retirement Income Amendment Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part. I call Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, for the opportunity to take a call in Part 1 of the New Zealand Superannuation and Retirement Income Amendment Bill. Mr Chair, this bill went through the Select Committee with considerable scrutiny from members across the House, and I would have liked to have been able to said when I took this first of several calls I would like to take during this committee stage debate that the committee came to some broad agreement about the bill, and I could have been able to say that because that is exactly what happened inside the committee. We were debating, as members who've been following this bill will know, the establishment of fund investment vehicles for the New Zealand Superannuation Fund. These are a new type of investment vehicle for the super fund to enable it to take advantage of investment opportunities for New Zealand, enable the Guardians to structure their investments in such a way as to maximise the returns, provide efficient returns, and also get some cost savings in terms of the management of funds. The issue that I want to spend a little bit of time on in this call, and perhaps another one, is around what was included by the Select Committee during our consideration of this bill. And that was effectively the changes to the new Section 59A, which is covered by Section 7 of Part 1 of the bill. And this was the bit where the committee took advice, as we do, from officials about what we should do in order to ensure that a new and innovative idea such as this is well managed. Because on this side of the House, we have no difficulty with the idea that the super fund, a very successful fund, JP Morgan's pension fund of the year, we note, should be given some latitude, some opportunity, some flexibility in how it makes its investments. That is a good thing. It's a mature fund now. It's reached a point where we believe this is a reasonable exercise. But in discussing the power to create these new fund investment vehicles, we got into a discussion about what would occur if it wasn't what is described in the bill as a passive holding entity. So if it's a passive holding entity, essentially in layperson's term, that means that the guardians of the fund have very limited involvement in how it's actually run. But the opportunity is there for there to be another type of entity, one that is more active in the style of investment that it might undertake. And in order for the Select Committee to be comfortable with that kind of vehicle, we as a committee agreed unanimously to include the idea that the Minister of Finance's approval would be required, not if it was a passive vehicle, but if it was any other type of fund investment vehicle. And so clause what would have been under the new Section 59A 1B, the Minister's approval for these other entities may be given for any class or classes of investments or entities and may set conditions as to the governance framework for the implementation and operation of the entities and as to the application of this Act to the entities. What this was about was providing some security that as we entered this brave new world of fund investment vehicles, that we should actually have, thank you Mr Bishop, that we should actually have some more security. Well, Mr Bishop might, as he laughs, might like to answer the question why, when he was in the committee, he was all in favour of the Minister being involved. He was all in favour of the Minister. He's now saying he wasn't in Parliament. We know he was manipulating the members of the committee from behind the scenes. No, I don't mean that. I don't mean that, Mr Chair. I don't mean that, Mr Chair. I'd like Mr Bishop then to ask the members, the National Party members of the Finance and Expenditure Committee who were on the committee last time, perhaps David Bennett might be an example of that, why they were happy and in fact proposed the introduction of this clause, because that's what happened, Mr Chair. Because the committee, on advice from officials, agreed that this was a protection that should be included in the law when we are trying out a new type of funding mechanism for the fund. But magically, on the table tonight appears an SOP in the Minister's name removing that section. Removing the section that the committee put in. So that's right. So I know we need to track this through. So the committee working in a very collegial manner, in a manner that is responsible, saying we want to give the super fund the opportunity to make use of a new mechanism for its investments. But if it's going to be anything more than a passive entity, then, Mr Chair,
Grant Robertson.
There was such competition. And there should be a mechanism by which the Minister of Finance now may have some say. Now, Mr Bishop, when he gets up, will say that compromises one of the core aspects of the fund when it was initially established, that it should not have ministerial involvement in the fund. And we continue to support the fact that the Guardians have done a very good job of managing the fund. But it's also important to note that neither was this type of fund investment vehicle envisaged when the fund was set up. The idea that actually the Guardians would have any active role themselves in investment was not envisaged when the fund was set up. When the fund was set up, it was all to be arm's length, and they've done a very good job, the fund, in terms of managing that investment. But the time has come, and the Guardians came to us and said they wanted this change, and it was accepted by the committee. But it was accepted by the Select Committee on the basis of a series of checks and balances that are now proposed by the Minister of Finance to be removed. And Mr Chair, on this side of the House, we're very disappointed that that's the situation that we've come to now. When a committee can go through a piece of legislation and as a House, we can come together and say these are the appropriate protections that would be put in here. So that is to be removed under the Minister's SOP, and I need to indicate at the outset that the Labor Party, while remaining very supportive of this bill, finds it hard to go against a consensus decision of the Select Committee on this matter, because we do believe that this is an important change, and we do believe it's one that that the Guardians themselves were not uncomfortable with. That's my recollection. I was only briefly on the committee when this bill was being discussed, but I do recall that the Guardians themselves remained comfortable with the idea that that this vehicle would work well with a ministerial oversight in the way we've suggested. It is important to note that allowing the Guardians to run fund investment vehicles is an exception to the rule, general rule proposed in section 59 of the original Act. What that said was the Guardians shouldn't be controlling any other entity. They're there to invest, they are there to do their best on behalf of the taxpayer, but they are not there under the section 59 as it currently reads to control any other entity. The committee, when we discussed this, agreed that the prohibition on control doesn't mean that doesn't preclude the fund from 100% ownership of assets, and there are examples of that where they might own a forest, but they don't manage the forest. So that's fine, we understood that, and the Guardians wanted to work to increase the proportion of the fund invested in the New Zealand assets, and that they realised that in doing that they may have to take a more active role in the way in which these fund investment vehicles were driven. That is fine, Mr Chair, but what is not fine is when the Select Committee comes in and says, we believe there is a way of managing this that will give confidence to the electorate that we are maintaining the integrity of the fund, that we are maintaining the independence of the Guardians. We are not giving them carte blanche to run and manage investments. We are putting in place a way in which the Minister of Finance will have some say on a very, very limited class of investment. And I think members on the other side need to get on their feet and tell us why it is that they are going against what was put in as an agreement by their members at the Select Committee. Because it's pretty extraordinary, actually, for a Minister of Finance to come to this House with an SOP that contradicts what National Party members in a committee have agreed to. It may be that time has elapsed and those committee members weren't able to convince the Minister when it went back to the National Party caucus, but I would have hoped that they would have been able to do that and ensure that New Zealanders could have continuing confidence that these new fund investment vehicles will be used in such a way as to be appropriate. One of the key elements that the Minister of Finance was to be involved in was in the question of what kind of governance arrangements there would be around these fund investment vehicles. So again, this is not saying that the Minister of Finance will make any specific decision on a specific investment. It's about the Minister of Finance having some say in the governance arrangements around that. Some say in the role that the Guardians will play, some say in the role that perhaps an independent investment manager might play in an investment that is effectively 100% controlled by the Guardians of the fund. That's a very useful and important check and balance, Mr. Chair.
I call